Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. I'm Michonne Boston.
And I'm Tequina Boston.
We're your hosts and real-life sisters who binge on historical drama.
We'll talk about films, fictional adaptations, and dramatic series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
So fill your teacup or mug with your favorite sip as we explore what's fact, what's fiction, and the so what on historical drama with the Boston Sisters. I'm Michonne Boston.
And I'm Tequina Boston.
In this podcast, Tequina and I look back at the first year of historical drama with the Boston Sisters and building this historical drama community going forward.
We're always learning something new from the podcast experience, our guests, listeners, and the historical dramas we've been watching for the podcast and personal enjoyment. We want to share some of our highlights and aha moments with you. Perhaps call it Meet the Boston Sisters Part 2.
We're building this historical drama community and invite you to join us for upcoming conversations about historical drama by signing up for our mailing list. You can find the link on michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters.
There's also a link to sign up for the mailing list on our Instagram bio at Historical Drama Sisters.
Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters' first anniversary came in November 2022. We launched our first 3 episodes in 2021, starting with Meet the Boston Sisters, followed by Passing with author and literary scholar Emily Bernard, and then Masterpiece, the PBS series, and a conversation with the series executive producer Suzanne Simpson. 22 more podcast episodes followed, and we added 6 bonus episodes.
When we started this podcast, our goal was to present historical films and dramatic series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present. This continues to guide the podcast focus.
So, I'm the founder of my own impact consulting company called the Michonne Boston Group, where I work with documentary filmmakers to extend the impact of their films beyond viewing to move hearts and minds to meaningful action. I've always believed narrative films, just like documentaries, can be as powerful to move hearts and minds. And this is why I wanted to create a podcast focused on historical drama.
So, Michonne, what impact do you think historical drama with the Boston Sisters is making?
One of the impacts, I think, is building this community with the live chats that we've been doing over the past years about historical drama films and series. And they're all almost always connected to books. And I think that's one of the direct impacts of historical dramas, specifically adaptations. It makes people go that one step further to a book, to resources, etc. One thing we did do in the past year was the Clubhouse event for the 40th anniversary of the U.S. premiere of Brideshead Revisited, which premiered on the PBS series Great Performances in 1981. The conversation is available as a bonus episode on historical drama with the Boston Sisters. And one thing I enjoyed about that conversation on the Clubhouse platform, which is where we had it, were people who were there and they still have the feelings, including myself, of what it was like to see that series for the first time, to see that story for the first time, which is based on a book by Evelyn Waugh. And also having people who have certain expertise around some of the themes in this series, especially the wine tasting. So we had Janet Cam there, who has joined us for other podcast episodes, like Julia. She was our guest there, and has been part of our live conversations that we've had for our subscribers, newsletter subscribers. And just the knowledge she brought about wines of the period of the 1920s, and even when they were drinking wine and strawberries, was that the right wine for that, pairing with strawberries, or is there a better wine? So, and Shazia Salim who owns Pop London Boutique. She was there to talk about fashion and who were the designers of that period. So those were some of the highlights of that conversation. It was very casual, it was fun, and we learned a lot just
Yeah.
listening to the people with the expertise.
Yeah, I also thought our experiment with trying a summer movie book club was kind of interesting. We invited subscribers to select among three books that were adapted to the screen and came out in summer of 2022. And those were Persuasion, which actually was released on Netflix, Mr. Malcolm's List, and Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. And those last two films were theatrical releases first. And it was fun having a live chat on Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, where we had the opportunity to talk specifically about fashion and in the 1950s and why the things that Mr. Dior was doing were revolutionary for the time and reflected the coming out of World War II and all the rationing and really getting back to luxury in fashion. And it was fun also providing recipes that we found online for mocktails and cocktails as part of that live chat, which was available to subscribers. We invited, again, our mailing list subscribers to be part of that conversation, which I think was pretty lively and fun.
I learned a lot about Dior fashion too, then and now, because it was fun, working with you and putting together the PowerPoint, the slideshow with the images of not just the costumes from the film, but the actual designs by Christian Dior. And then you have the knowledge of what they're doing now because you read a lot of fashion social media and magazines, and I'm kind of like behind on that reading right now. But it was great just visually. The conversation was very interesting. But here's a question I have for you about the book club. Did you think that Mrs. Harris would be the book? Because there were three pretty, I would say, good books, good reads. We had Persuasion, which was turned into a Netflix film, adapted. And we had Mr. Malcolm's List, which was a new book, but still set in Regency, England. And, that was a very popular movie and it's now streaming. What were your thoughts about what book came to the top of the list from our
Well,
subscribers?
I was surprised by Mrs. Harris, which is more of a novella than a novel. I think we had three different kinds of fiction. One was, kind of like light summer read. One was in more of the mode of your Bridgerton type novels, set in the past, but not written by an author from the past. And then we had Persuasion, of course, which is a Jane Austen. And of course, Jane Austen has her fans and folks who are pretty particular about the portrayals of Jane Austen. But I think what was something that we emphasize in all of our podcast conversations, even the chats, is what do we learn about that past and how it's still in some ways part of our present, and how are we seeing a mirror of our own time in these dramas about the past. And of course, we're very interested in representation, so we also looked for models of color who were muses or who participated in Dior's couture fashion
Yeah,
shows.
that was an aha for me.
Yeah, especially the woman who was, I think, she was biracial Asian, and she was one of his muses. So that's always fascinating when you have those kinds of discoveries. And I think that's why our conversation with Glory Sam Jolly, when we talk about Belle, which was our last podcast of 2022, also is fascinating because, again, we are making discoveries about history, hidden history, untold stories, and people who we're only coming to learn about as actually having a presence in these historical dramas that we're seeing.
Yeah, I really enjoy talking with Glory because these paintings, we talk about art history in that podcast. And it's just so, this is what I say is the benefit of historical drama. It just leads you into, these layers because Belle was inspired by probably a painting, let's just say, because
Right.
there is the painting of Dido, Elizabeth Belle. And then we have the film. So some people are getting to know her story through the film first and then go back to the painting. And then the
Right.
painting has layers to that story, which, I
Yeah.
was very happy to see that as the choice from one of our listeners because we had an opportunity to go further than the film or maybe go back to the painting and then come back to the film.
Yeah, and that by request is something that we hope our subscribers will take advantage of, but you do have to be on the mailing list in order to make a request. Another chat we had was really lively was about the fifth season of The Crown that
Oh my
followed
God.
on. Yeah, it followed on our podcast with the Reverend Dr. Teresa Cooley looking at leadership in the three women in the Crown series. Of course, Queen Elizabeth, but also Margaret Thatcher and Princess Diana. But the conversation we had with members of our subscriber listening community was quite lively. Do you want to say something about that?
Well, before I go into that, I want to say The Crown, our conversation about The Crown and the podcast and everything. I mean, the timing, it's all about the timing. And I always say to documentary filmmakers when they're about to launch an impact campaign, watch the news cycle because your story can take on a different life or it can go in a different direction with audiences and engagement based on what's happening in real time. And that was what happened, I think, with us with putting the podcast out around the crown. It was after the death of Queen Elizabeth II. And then, as we started to get into this conversation online, you could see where people were anticipating the release of Meghan and Harry, the docuseries, in addition to watching The Crown, which was all on Netflix.
I think too what made the Crown conversation interesting was in addition to our listeners, we also had one of our podcast guests in that conversation.
We had two.
Well, actually two. That's right. We had two. We had Emily Bernard and Janet Cam.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had a friend of one of our podcast guests who was a woman who had grown up in the UK and had an actual experience of having the Queen make a visit and doing the whole ritual of curtsying, et cetera, and was able to talk about what it was like to grow up in the UK, what it was like to have the Queen as a presence in your life, not from the perspective of us
Yeah, from a
living in the United
distance.
States, yeah, which in our minds it's like she was queen for so long, like to hear God save the king just sounds weird. But like, what is that experience like when you've grown up with those traditions and that they're really part of your heritage? And that was a really lively and interesting conversation we had with the Crown.
In fact, I think that conversation will probably continue
Yeah, I'm
as
looking forward to season
as
6,
season
series
6
6.
comes up, and we don't know when that will be, but yes, that was a very good conversation. And one thing we do when we have our live conversations, we don't record them, and that allows people to sort of be their lively selves and for the conversation to sort of take on its own organic direction.
Yeah, its own flavor. And I think also what makes it fun is that we have suggested snacks. So for
Oh
the
yeah.
crown, we provided the Dubonnet cocktail, which was Queen Elizabeth's favorite one of her favorite cocktails. And then we also had suggested Earl Grey tea and shortbread cookies.
And I
So
don't know what happened with me. I had this thing for shortbread cookies for a couple of months, and I did make some for the holidays, which I'm still munching on now, um,
yeah,
and they're
yeah,
quite good. Actually, I liked shortbread for a very long time and didn't realize it until, we were in recent months and seeing it in television dramas. See what I mean about the impact of things, of
yeah,
dramas and media. So.
yeah,
Yeah, that was lots of fun. That was
yeah.
lots of fun.
And of course, again, that is the folks who knew about that opportunity are the folks who are on the mailing list.
Yeah, we do a lot of foodie stuff now for our live events, which is lots of fun to put together suggested suggested munchies, mix and sips,
Yeah.
chats and chews. So that's fun to sort of pull the package together for our subscribers.
And then it was great fun to do Belle by Request. One of our listeners, Joanne Fort, who's in Atlanta, wanted us to do a conversation about Belle. And because of our Instagram uh, following of Gloria Samjali, who's an artist, but also very much an art historian, looking specifically at African Europeans, we had the opportunity not only to have a chat about the film, but also to learn more about African Europeans. And also, our listener was able to tell us what was special about the film Belle for her and to offer up a question for our podcast guest.
And like most listeners, me included, I mean, I'm one of those people who might be watching a drama, historical drama on television, and doing searches around certain topics in it or people in it as the drama's unfolding. And Joanne did the same thing. I mean, you couldn't do it in the movie theater, of course, but with Belle, it did lead her to do more research around Dido Elizabeth Belle's life, the people in the film. And she shares that in the podcast. It was great having her on to talk about what stood out for her in the movie and in this real life story.
Yeah, and
Um,
remember too, she mentioned the story of the Zong. Again,
yeah,
a not well known story, but one about how that situation involving enslaved Africans who were sacrificed in order to collect insurance money led to a case that was instrumental in the UK's abolition movement.
yeah. One thing I got from that conversation is the stories that we aren't told, and how I don't know. It's people like Lori, it's people like Joanne, maybe it's us in this podcast to bring those stories forward, because there are a lot of things we just weren't taught or told in school. I mean, I think taught and told may be two different things. And what you just brought up about the Zong, I mean, we didn't learn about that in school.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting even talking to Gloria about how do they teach about
Yeah.
history in the UK, particularly now that there's such a debate going on about how history is taught, particularly in public schools. And there's a tendency to want to hide the parts of history that are challenging. And I'm glad that in the podcast, we just go ahead and take that on because I think, as they say, it's the truth that will make you free. And I remember when we were talking specifically about the Woman King, that it was really important just to name some of the challenges around the history of Africa and African uh, participation in the transatlantic slave trade, and also looking at the whole subject of empire in general, which also came up around our conversation with Deborah Ghosh about Bridgerton and
Right.
where does the
Where's the
money
money
come
come
from,
from?
and the East India Company, and and Britain. We're seeing wrestling with that now around the whole conversation around the Commonwealth and what does that mean and what changes might be coming. So, definitely like history is a little bit of a prologue to the present and may give us some indication of where we might be going in the future. So I think in terms of impact, it's just been an opportunity to open some doors to learning and curiosity and looking deeper and just kind of going on some journeys. Including, I would say, for me personally, seeing Mr. Sunshine, which is a Korean historical drama, but also contains some U.S. History and some Japan, Imperial Japan history.
Hmm.
That was a portal for me into Korean dramas, and it was very interesting meeting Kat Turner,
Yes.
whose own journey has been very much influenced by Korean films, to the point where she actually took a trip, has been journeying in Korea, which is where she was born. But you and I, Michonne, went to the Korean legation
Yeah,
building.
I would never have thought to go there if not for Mr. Sunshine. And you
Yeah,
introduced me to Mr. Sunshine, and I was like, wow, wow, wow.
yeah.
These stories, the story unfolding,
And then we went to the Textile Museum to see the exhibition on the history of Korean fashion.
including the costume design in some
Yes.
of the dramas.
Yeah, and how even the traditional hanbok um, clothing is being incorporated into contemporary Korean fashion, and also attending the symposium that George Washington University's Korean Studies Department put on around Korean fashion. So, you just never know where a film might lead you, or a
Yeah.
series like Mr. Sunshine.
Yeah, for me, impact has probably been a lot more reading than I did before because in preparing for the podcast, I do the reading prior, a lot more watching than I've done in the past,
Yep.
a lot more selective watching too. Um,
And it's influenced my cooking as well, because now I'm very interested in Korean cuisine and also some of the foods from some of the historical periods that we are introduced to through these dramas.
I will say that one of the things I probably have learned from this is that story matters sometimes even more so than the absolute historical accuracy. I know some people get caught up in that conversation. We don't because we're looking at it from a different angle, probably from the storytelling angle and the elements of a period that are being incorporated into the story that we still can recognize or learn or say, oh, that's what it was like. Of course, I admire those people who do the art design and do the props and do the training around how people would sit, how people would walk, and the costumers and all the people involved in making historical drama. And it just makes me read more, makes me want to learn more. So I would say that's been the impact for me.
Yeah. So we've got some plans for the future. You want to say a little bit about some of the series and films we're looking forward to in 2023?
Well, there were some films that have already been series that are already out there that we just wanted to talk about. We just are hoping that someone will answer the email or get back to us. So, I mean, one of them was the series Gentleman Jack, which takes place in 1840s, I would say, the industrial age in
I
England.
think that's right.
And based on the memoirs, the coded memoirs, I think she wrote in code, Ann Lister.
Yeah, that's a very interesting series.
Very interesting series. And I would say the takeaway for me from that is a marriage is a marriage is a marriage.
Yeah,
Um, so that's been
yeah.
on HBO Max.
So
And we,
she and her partner were the first recorded same-sex marriage in the UK.
yes.
So
Yeah, a marriage is a marriage. And that was a very good series. I don't think it's been renewed, but it's worth watching.
on
And
HBO, yeah.
I would look forward to a conversation about it. Of course, Chevalier, me being such a huge fan of Alexander Dumas, this was a contemporary, a composer who was also of African origin. He was a contemporary of Alexander Dumas, meaning the Three Musketeers guy. His father, who was Alexander Dumas, the general, he and what's his name?
Saint
Joseph.
George, Joseph Saint George de Chevalier. Is that?
Yes, were.
Don't quote us, people.
Don't quote us. We're doing this right from the top of the head. Joseph Boulogne, who was a composer, who was a great violinist, who was an excellent swordsman. He is getting a biopic treatment, and that's coming up, and we're looking forward to talking about that one. It is on our list.
And then we don't know when the Queen Charlotte prequel to Bridgerton is coming out, but that's looking really interesting. And we want to talk to some folks who do some other kinds of behind the scenes work in historical dramas, like people who do the composing or the soundtracks, because definitely music sets a period, but it also, like in a series like A League of Their Own, you might mix it up a little bit so that it is a commentary on our own time as well as a reflection of the past. And then, of course, we have some series that are returning that we're looking forward to talking about, like Sanditon 3 is coming up. There's also a second season for Julia and the Gilded Age that we're looking forward to. We don't have dates on those yet, but we're expecting that those will be released sometime in the near future.
And speaking of soundtracks, a film coming up that I'm curious about is called Spinning Gold, about Casablanca Records. If you remember, if you listen to Donna Summer, so it's going to be a lot of good music in that one. I'm expecting. So kind of curious about that one. We'll be looking out for that one. And currently, I'm looking at when you talk about soundtracks, Perry Mason on HBO, the remake. They're going to get a second season, but their soundtrack is composed by Terrence Blanchard. And actually, it's kind of interesting for me to watch a drama, but really listening to the music and seeing, okay, here's the scene. What are we listening for? And that will be an interesting conversation to see how you compose for a scene and what the composer is thinking. So fingers crossed we can have that conversation.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about what our subscribers can look forward to, the folks who sign up for the mailing list?
Well, when you sign up for our mailing list, I don't know if this is a commercial, but we want you to be part of these conversations. We're going to have more live and lively chats about historical drama films and series. We are also going to look forward to our By Request episodes where our mailing list subscribers can send us their favorite films. We're recommending films because series take a little while to review and pull the thing
Or
together.
even just to watch.
Just to watch. There's a time commitment there. But suggest a favorite film, and then poof, we may do a podcast about it, and you will be on the podcast to talk about your recommended film. Also, what else is on the list?
Well, we're looking at posting some recaps.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And more bonus content.
Yeah, because the recaps, there's a lot of content out there. Sometimes we just can't capture it all for our podcast, even though it really, really interests us. So we're looking forward to having a space and putting a space up where we can recap some of those things and make sure you're not missing it.
And the great thing about streaming is you can read a recap and decide whether or not you want to commit to watching a series or a film.
That's true. That's true. So we're going to wrap up here. We are the Boston Sisters, and we're going to do our general wrap-up, which is inviting you to share this and past episodes of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters with someone you know who would enjoy this conversation. Subscribe to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Also, subscribe to us on our Historical Drama website so that you can be on the mailing list. Visit our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters and sign up for our mailing list in order to receive invitations to our live historical drama conversations, our chat-ups, bonus content, and other podcast news in your mailbox. Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters newsletter subscribers can also submit listener requests.
You can also support the podcast by visiting our affiliate bookstore on bookshop.org, where you'll find titles related to our podcast themes and episodes. Book purchases support independent booksellers, and a small commission supports the Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters podcast.
Like and share Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters on your social media.
This is Michonne Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast about historical films and series dramas. Visit our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters.
Tell us what historical dramas you're watching. Who knows? We may do a show about it. Sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, and share it with the people you know who binge on historical drama.
Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters is brought to you by the Michonne Boston Group. The views and opinions expressed on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters are those of the speakers and do not represent the positions or views of the Michonne Boston Group, its clients, or affiliates. This is Michonne Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston. Thank you for listening.